Well, hello, and welcome back to stately Vaughan Manor. And today, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on Stephen King. And my thoughts on Stephen King are a little bit complex, so I've thought a lot about this video. I'm not sure I've come to any real conclusions, but I thought enough about it that I thought, well, it's about time I do that video and talk to everyone about Stephen King. Stephen King's an interesting writer. If you there's a huge range of opinions about this guy, about whether this guy's a great writer or just terrible. Certainly Steve Donahue, who is the big-time book two hero, Steve Donahue, doesn't like Stephen King at all. Critic S.T. Joshi, who has done a lot of work with some classic horror writers, like H.P. Lovecraft and a bunch of others, doesn't like Stephen King at all. There are a lot of critics who do not like Stephen King at all and just do not find any value in his writing. On the other hand, you've got thousands upon thousands of people who just love Stephen King and think he's the greatest writer in the world. I can kind of see both sides of this, because one thing about Stephen King, it seems to me, is that he's really, really inconsistent. You never know if you're going to get a really good Stephen King book or junk, because he's written a lot of both. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I do think, though, that before I even get into any of that, I do want to say that I do think Stephen King can be a pretty good writer. He's written some pretty good books, in my opinion. So yeah, he definitely, he does some things really well, and when he gets those things right, his books are really, really compelling, and they're really emotionally engaging, and they're just good books. I mean, sorry, guys who hate Stephen King, but a lot of his books are actually pretty good. So I'm going to talk first of all my top 5 Stephen King books, just to get it out of the way so you see where I'm coming from and what books I think are good Stephen King books. So let's go 5 to 1, like we do on these lists. So number 5, the 5th best in my opinion, is this one, Night Shift by Stephen King. This is I believe this is his first collection of short stories. He's written some pretty good short stories, and a lot of them are in here. They're not all winners, but a lot of the short stories in here are pretty good. From what I remember, Skeleton Crew was a pretty good collection as well. He's written some good short stories, and they're in here, so this is number 5. Number 4, I'm going to be going with this big guy, The Stand by Stephen King. Now, a lot of things that Stephen King gets wrong, as far as I'm concerned in writing, there's a little bit of that in here. There's a little bit of extraneous stuff going on in here that isn't really necessary, probably. But it's all entertaining enough. I mean, there's some scenes in here that are just ridiculous and took me out of the book when I read it. But it's mostly really, really good. Yeah, so with a couple caveats, I say The Stand is a really good Stephen King book. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I'm due to reread this at some point. All right, number 3. 3. I'm not good at counting, especially backwards. That would be The Shining. This is the creepy kid cover of The Shining. This is another really good Stephen King book. Again, it's not perfect. There are a couple things in here that just, in my opinion, don't work. But mostly, it works pretty well. Quite a bit different from the film, so you should read it even if you've seen the movie. In fact, I'm going to say that about every book and movie. If you've seen the movie, you should still read the book. But this is different enough from the film that it's not an entirely different experience, but it's pretty close to being one. The main character is very different in the book, in my opinion, than he was in the film. In the film, he was just, crazy from the start. It's a lot different in the book, and it's well worth reading, I think. This definitely is one of his best books. Again, it's not 100% winner. There are still things in here that, but mostly a really, really good Stephen King book. All right, number 2. What could it be? Salem's Lot. This is a good one. This is genuinely scary at times. Really like this book. Great vampire book. Probably one of the best vampire books ever written, in my opinion. This is really, really good. Yeah, I mean, Salem's Lot. I'm not even going to go into the plot. If somehow you've not read this, read it. This is really Stephen King at his best, I think. A lot of the things that Stephen King does, that he does right, are in here. Yeah, I like this one. Yeah. So, what could be the number 1 book? Now, this might be controversial in itself, that this is, in my opinion, the best thing Stephen King ever did. In fact, if Stephen King had only written this one thing and never wrote anything else, he would still be, in my opinion, a great, great horror writer. And that's because this book, as a horror novel, is pretty damn near perfect. This could be the near perfect horror novel, if not the perfect horror novel, and that is this one, Pet Sematary. This book is great. Everything that Stephen King does well, he does well in this book. And unlike most of his books, there's not a lot of digressive, extraneous nonsense. Every time that he goes off on a tangent, it works to the benefit of the story. And man, that is not always true with Stephen King. Everything in here is essential to building the story and building the sense of dread and horror of the story. And unlike a lot of Stephen King books, the ending of this is fantastic. He really sticks the landing on this one. Yeah, this is the near perfect horror novel, in my opinion. It's great. This could be, no, it is. This is the best horror novel I've ever read. Highest praise for this one. Now, I know you saw the films, probably. One of those films was okay. The other movie was just not quite okay. But the book is fantastic. And yeah, you've probably read it already. Everybody has. But I love it. And again, I will reread this again someday. So those are my 5 favorites. There are a couple others that could have been on there. The Dead Zone could have been on there. The Dead Zone was a really good book. He made a few other really good books. But he's also done a lot of books that are just straight up no good at all, waste of time books. Now, I'm not going to go into what those might be. I mean, you might have your opinions. But here's the thing about this guy, Stephen King. Really, really inconsistent. Up and down, all over as far as quality is concerned. I'm not sure why. I have my theories on Stephen King. Now, I don't know how he writes. I've never written his book. I've never read his book on writing, where I'm sure he goes into his process of writing. So I don't know. I'm only going on what I'm seeing on the page. And from what I'm seeing on the pages of these books, and also if you just look at the volume of what he's produced, my feeling is he doesn't allow an editor to do much to his work, and he doesn't have a lot of... He doesn't take enough of a step back and look at what he's written critically, and to go over what he's written and to say, you know what, this doesn't need to be there, this works, I could fix that. It really feels like to me in a lot of Stephen King books, like he's just going, he's just writing, He goes, produces, done, that book's done. And he starts on the next one. He just goes. Doesn't always know where he's going with the story, I think. A lot of his work, it just doesn't seem like he knows the target. Again, I could be wrong, but just from what I'm seeing, a lot of his books just seem like, and they just don't work. And when something doesn't work, he's not able to take enough of a step back to look at it and say, okay, take a step back, walk out, take a walk or something, wait a couple days, go back, read it, and just take a critical look himself and just say, okay, this works and that doesn't. Maybe I could fix that. He doesn't do this, I don't think. It doesn't seem like it. Maybe he does. But if he does, he's doing it wrong a lot of the time. And I'm going to use an example here. I'm going to talk about the novel It, which a lot of people think is his best novel. It's not. It's a lot of it. In fact, most of it is really, really good. It could be a great novel. But it has a lot of problems, and they're those typical Stephen King problems. And I think, I know he's had trouble with alcohol. I know he has had trouble with drugs. I have a feeling that Cujo, for example, he was stoned the entire time he wrote that book, because that book could have been 120 pages long. Probably would have been a better book. But instead, he just goes off on all these weird tangents in Cujo that have nothing to do with the story he's trying to tell. It's just all this extraneous nonsense that just, even if some of it's entertaining, it has nothing to do with the story at all. Cujo, man, cut that sucker down and you would have a good book. A lot of that you'll find in It, which is a terrible shame because so much of It is really, really good. I mean, when he hits it in that book, it's really working. I mean, some of the scenes are just terrifying. But then he will go off on these weird tangents that don't really, and some of them work, but some of them don't. And the most notorious thing in It, of course, and you know what I'm talking about, happens. I hate that I even have to discuss this, but this is the perfect example of what is wrong with Stephen King when he goes wrong. And that is the notorious underage children having sex scene. I can't believe I even said that in one of my videos, but this happens in It, and it's the notorious part of It. And I've heard, and there's no reason for it really, story-wise. This doesn't need to happen. He was just going, and I don't know where his brain went when this scene came up, and I've heard excuses for it. And his excuse for that scene, I believe, was something to do with, well, this was a transition from childhood to adulthood, and that's why no, man, no. Sex has nothing to do with the transition to adulthood. It is not some kind of rite of passage to adulthood. It's not. And if you think that, that's just sad. And at some point, if you were not so stoned, and I hope he was stoned when he wrote that. But even if he was, he should have later said, you know what, I don't know about that. That should not be in there. And he should have had an editor that looked at that and just said, what the hell, Stephen King? Take that out. That's crazy. You can't have that in this book. It's crazy. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't make any sense. I'm assuming that by this point in Stephen King's career, everything he typed was gold, right? So don't touch it. Just let him work. We don't understand it, but just let him work, and everything he touches is gold, and it's like typing money, this guy. Maybe it was something like that. But somebody at some point should have read that and gone to him and said, you can't have that in here. It's crazy. And maybe somebody did. I hope somebody did. And I hope he was just like, no, I've got to have everything I write in the book. There was no excuse for that scene. None at all. And it pretty much torpedoed that book, because a lot of that book was really, really good. That is an extreme example of some of the things that you will find in a Stephen King novel that just don't work, don't make any sense, don't help the story at all, and yet he puts it in there and doesn't go back and say, oh, that sucks, I should take that out. So much of that kind of thing is in his work that it's understandable that a book critic could just at some point just think, this guy's lazy, this guy doesn't think about what he's writing, this guy just doesn't, he's a hack or whatever, which isn't true, because he can be a really, really good writer. He can be. And a lot of his books are great. You just don't know which ones they're going to be. And you don't know which book is going to be good most of the way and then just have something like that was in it and just, I mean, this is his issue. And so he's got all of these books, and so I have a feeling that eventually, some sad day when Stephen King is gone, he will only be remembered for a handful of books. Rightfully so. The books that he's written that are good are really good books. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be talking about the Tommyknockers in 30 years. I really don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt it. I think eventually a lot of his books are going to go out of print, and I mean, maybe, I don't know, and he will be remembered for a handful. I suspect that's what's going to happen. So my feelings about Stephen King are a little complex. There's too much of that. I mean, too much of that. I mean, I didn't even start Under the Dome, It sounded like a great idea, but then I kind of heard that it went in that kind of direction. I'm like, do I want to spend like 1,000 pages reading this Stephen King book and just have it end badly? Because a lot of his endings, again, just don't work. And I never read it, so I don't know. Maybe it's a great book. But anyway, those are my feelings on Stephen King. And I have thought about this. And I haven't, of course, read all of Stephen King's books by any means. There's a lot of books I haven't read. I kind of jump here and there on Stephen King's books. But from what I've read, those are my feelings. Let me know if you think I'm just totally off target on this. Let me know if you think I'm completely wrong or crazy. Let me know your opinions. I'm kind of anxious to see what you think. If you think I'm crazy, let me know and say, Mike, you're crazy. Okay, maybe I am. So those are my unfiltered thoughts on Stephen King and also the books that I think he's written that are well worth reading. Okay, I'll catch you back here tomorrow. Bye, guys.